My name is Wim Demey. I'm working for CTG. We are a services company based in Brussels in Belgium. And I will tell you a story about performance testing in an agile context, what is below the iceberg. If we talk about performance testing and non-functional testing in general, then it's often a hard challenge for us, how to define a good approach. And sometimes I have the feeling like those kind of testing types, the so-called ilities testing, so portability, usability, but also security, performance, they are a little bit the outlaws of testing. And with all outlaws, everyone knows the outlaws, but no one wants to get in contact with it. And especially for performance testing, you can look to it like to an iceberg. And there are two ways. Or you look from far, and you see only the top of the iceberg, and you think, okay, performance testing, easy peasy, 2 fingers in the nose, we just reserve a couple of days and we will do the performance test. And of course, once you are there to do the performance test, you see, oh, we have underestimated. There is a lot more effort required than we thought. Or in the second case, somebody comes to you and says, hey, you have to do performance testing right now. We go into production tomorrow. And then it's like a huge iceberg. It's massive. You don't know where to start. Who do we need to involve? Which environment? Which test data? So you are clueless. And this kind of behavior, it's often reflected in your test plan, in your test strategy. Do the exercise. Think at your last test plan, strategy, and look up the section where you're talking about performance testing. And one of those famous keywords will be there. TBD, someone I guess stands for to be defined. Second one, UC, under construction. And last one is OD, see other document. So it are just always to put that, the difficult question away from us. And I don't know, but in the status meeting, when performance testing is on the agenda, that's often the topic that falls off the agenda. Okay, let's discuss it next week. But, guess what? Performance matters. If you want it or not, if you hate it or not, you have to deal with performance. And on the web, there are many examples of companies who have suffered or who are suffering performance issues. And one thing is crystal clear. If you have performance issues, it will hurt you on one of those aspects. And so far, I hope I didn't tell anything new. Those messages are already around for years and years, and on every conference somebody is saying the same. But even, it's hard to convince our management to put the money in performance testing. And maybe they think, yeah, okay, if our site, our app is a little bit slower, what does it make? Well, this handy tool can help you. It's a tool by Google, and with a few parameters, you can get at least a rough estimation of the impact on revenue. So, and this, because at the end of the day, your management is interested about the money. How many money do I need to invest in performance testing? Amazon has done this exercise for their own online shopping, the Amazon.com. And the result was that if their website is 1 second slower, it results in a drop of 2% of the overall sales revenue. So it's big. But, okay, in the assumption, we have done performance testing. We did it according to the book. Everything we have done, we can still be impacted. And why? We are living in a very interconnected world. We have to deal with Internet of Things, microservices, web services. So it can happen that in one other place, if there is an outage of a component, you can be impacted too. And that can cost you a lot of money. And the so-called domino effect, that's not something which is only exclusive for IT. It's playing in other domains as well. And I give you an example of the energy sector. I thought in 2006, there was an overload of electricity on the German part of the network. And within a time frame of 17 seconds, the complete network in Europe was down. So there was a complete blackout of the network. In Belgium, and maybe you know that or not, our nuclear installations are not in that good shape. A lot of them are in a maintenance. And every year, there is the fear that we will have an outage of electricity. And they made a calculation. If in Belgium an outage or a blackout would happen again, it will cost us that amount of money per hour. And when I was preparing the presentation, I thought, yeah, those are amazing amounts. What can you buy for this amount? Well, if you are interested in the Titanic model kit, for that amount you can buy 2.8 million boxes. Okay, so performance is important. And a very recent report by Gartner is stating the same. And even if you look to the definition, they are not talking about performance testing, they are talking about performance engineering. So it goes much broader than just doing performance testing. And if you as a company, if you don't embrace performance testing, you will be out. Simple like that. And maybe one last statement to convince your management is this one. And I heard this statement last week when I was at a partner event of a vendor who is selling performance tools. And I think it's true. Just look to yourself. If you have an app and it's slow, what are we doing? Deinstall, look up in the App Store another app. Website, if you want to buy something and it's slow, you just go to the competition. And if you have done this, did you ever questioning yourself? Yeah, but maybe that company, they have put a lot of effort in quality, they have maybe done a lot of performance testing, so maybe it's by accident that the site is slow? We don't matter about it. We just judge a company, a product on what we see in production. Let's go back to the agile context. Performance testing, it's not fully embraced in the agile context. It's not fully embraced like development is, like analysis is, like testing should be. And if we may dream, then that's the kind of pyramid I have in my mind. And the upper layer, that's the classical way of working in the waterfall project. And even there you see that within testing, what are we doing with performance testing? Yeah, put it to the end. And even for normal functional testing, we don't have the time. So certainly for performance testing, yeah, there is certainly no time left. The second layer is the one with the companies that are saying, yeah, we are doing agile. And what are you doing agile? Oh, we do development in agile. And what about testing? Yeah, we put it over the wall. But performance testing comes always to the end. And finally, the final ideal end state is CPT, continuous performance testing, which is fully embedded, fully embraced in your sprints. But why are we not there? Why are we not yet there? Because I see that companies and projects, they are moving more and more, and then some are looking to performance testing, have started, or are already a little bit further. But there are some reasons that blocks us from full embracement. And to me, I see 3 reasons. Non-functional requirements, planning, and team organization. Let's dive into. Non-functional requirements. Who likes this non-functional requirement? Is this a good one? Hopefully. No. If I need to do performance testing with this requirement, I can continue until the end of my life. Because okay, what is fast? What is fast? 15 seconds. Let's assume I have an average response time of 15 seconds. Is that good? I don't know. I don't know if I don't know the context. If I come from a system which took 1 hour to process data, wow, 50 seconds is a big increase. While if we come from a system where in the previous release the response time was 10 seconds, then I have a problem. So let's start with refining the requirement. And now you see the non-functional requirement become more rich, and it contains a lot of information. It contains information about the input. What is the kind of concurrent usage we expect? And with the concurrent usage, we can tell something about the throughput, the number of pages we expect. And based on the throughput, that tells something about the required capacity of my server. And you see that the response times, they are defined more granular. Last time I was working on a project and the business stated very firmly, every transaction need to answer within 5 seconds. Sorry guys. If you just call a web service, okay, that's reasonable. But if you call a web service and it is calling on his turn another service or even starting a process in the back end, yeah, 15 seconds, it's not of 5 seconds, it's not realistic. So whatever effort we will try to obtain, we will never meet the requirement. And like you see, the last line is telling something about what is the allowed fault tolerance. And this information can be important for your operations people, so that they know that they can set up the services, processes, and with this information, they can think of scalability, capacity management. Okay, that's our non-functional requirement. Of course, in Agile, we are working with user stories. How can I integrate this in my user stories? Let's take one. So this is our job site. So we are still looking for people. And this is a simple user story. And I have defined some non-functional requirement for this user story. How will we integrate both parts of the information? I have several ideas. First of all, every user story has acceptance criteria. So we just add the non-functional requirements to the other existing acceptance criteria. I was reading an article and there were different opinions about non-functional requirements. And the article was saying performance is not adding any functionality. So even it is not allowed to talk about a user story where the main focus is on non-functional things. And they proposed, in that case, then you need to call it a technical user story. Of course, the drawback of working with technical user stories is the fact that you will double information because you have your more functional-oriented user story, and next to that, you have your technical user story. Another way is list all your non-functional requirements as a constraint. So the constraint, if you are familiar with the SAFe model, so the Scaled Agile Framework model, there it's a known concept, constraints. And a constraint can be about security of your system, but can also be about performance of your system. And the last thing you can use to incorporate the non-functional requirements is the definition of done. And a definition of done, you can have it on multiple levels. You can have it on the level of your user story, on your sprint, on your release, maybe even on feature and epic. So there are different ideas to integrate non-functional requirement information in user stories. And that's the SAFe model. And you will see that even in the SAFe model, they have defined the non-functional requirements backlog. So the message from the SAFe model is very clear. Just like you have backlog for all functional things, you need to maintain a backlog for all the non-functional ones. And you have to integrate them into your sprint and releases. Second one, planning. Let's take a release. I have a release consisting of 4 sprints, and the last one is the hardening sprint. Hardening sprint is typically the sprint that is used to integrate everything and to solve the last loose ends. Let's raise a hand. Who will do performance testing in sprint 1? Sprint 2? Sprint 3? And in the hardening sprint? Yeah. Let me say, doing testing in the hardening sprint, and please don't take it personally, that's not a good idea. And why not? Because typically, and that's often the sprint that customers and projects are thinking at, because they think, okay, then we have everything together, then we have something stable to do performance testing on. But assume that you are doing in the hardening sprint a performance test and you have serious performance issue. What will you do? Knowing that normally after the hardening sprint, you should go into production with your MVP. So my recommendation is start small from the left. And what does it mean? Already in your first sprint, on very small components, you can do already performance testing. And that can be often just a function, a call to a web service, but even profiling of a query. Let's take the example. If a developer in sprint 1 has to deliver a query, and his query takes 1 second. Absolutely, you could say, okay, that's good, but of course your system is not built on that one query, so if every query takes 1 second, in the end your response times will be maybe something about half a minute. And so in sprint 2, you continue. And on the components which can be already integrated, you do again a performance test. Even, in most cases, still without a GUI. But you can use tools which can launch web requests with a number of users. And so you continue, and finally, in your hardening sprint, you still do a performance test, but then on end-to-end flows, on business scenarios. And often another misunderstanding is that people think, oh, performance testing, we need to do that big load test with 1,000 users. No. In the first sprint, we talk about 5, 10, 20 users here, and only here that are more the big bunch load tests. And to illustrate that, in the current project, we had a tool, so a lot of commercial tools comes with a free bunch of 50 virtual users. And the system was developed by a supplier, and we told them we will do performance tests with this tool with 50 users. And he was laughing with us. He said, hey, you are stupid. Do you really think that my system will break with 50 users? I say, okay, let's do the test. 2 days later, my colleague, he called me and said, yeah, they're not laughing anymore. I detected a memory leak with only 10 users. And just before I came to here, I called them to know, hey, are you doing now big performance tests with 1,000? I say, oh my God, no. We are still working with the 50 users. And I can do all the performance tests with 50 users because I just break the system without any problem. Second thing, automate where relevant. In most agile projects, you have your CI/CD pipeline, and then it's very easy, like you have your automated unit test, your build, you can automate your performance test, or at least trigger the execution from a Jenkins, from Bamboo. And maybe one thing about the previous thing. In every sprint, you need to foresee what I call a tax of story points. Because if you met the performance requirements in sprint 1, you still have to meet them in all other sprints. So you have to foresee in planning your sprint some story points to redo your performance test. And last but not least, monitor from the right. And I had a discussion with my colleagues, and they say, yeah, why are you telling from the right and you put an arrow to the left? Well, when we talk about monitoring, that's often considered as that's the operations guys, that's not for us. That once we are in the run phase, okay, then those guys need to deal with it. And it's their job. My recommendation is involve those guys already in your performance testing in a very early stage. And that has several benefits. First of all, they can help you with giving your information about the load you need to foresee. Based on transaction logs in production, they can see, okay, this kind of transaction, we have a peak between 8 and 12, or maybe at the end of the month. And this information is very important. Another benefit is they can configure the monitoring tools on the complete chain of your application. The current project where I was talking about, they had implemented Dynatrace, which is one of the most known monitoring tools, but they deployed it out of the box without any configuration. And they were complaining, yeah, people are complaining about performance, but according to our dashboards, yeah, we don't see anything. Of course not. It was not configured, and they were not monitoring the components of that chain. Last reason why performance testing is not fully embraced is team. And when it comes to team, then there are several aspects. Who needs to be involved in performance testing? What are the capacities, the capabilities you need? What do I need when I don't have those capabilities in my team? And another misunderstanding is that a test automator is a performance tester and vice versa. No, not at all. It can be, but in most cases, it's not like that. Because it requires other skills. It's another type of work. In the end, it's both a kind of technical activity, but it's not something that you can say to your automator, oh, you have some idle time, just make me some performance tests, do the run, do your analysis. No, not at all. Problem is in agile working, and that's a real example. So we were in the squad 2, and the Scrum Master asked us, yeah, do some performance testing on the components in my scope, so the yellow blocks. Of course, you are not working in an isolated system. Our system has links with other blocks, firewall, Active Directory, and even there were some external third-party components. And we went back to our Scrum Master, we say, hey, we need a guy from the firewall because we have some issues. Yeah, not possible. Yeah, this guy is already planned in his sprint. Yeah, you have to wait till the next sprint, but say, hey, then we can do nothing because we need that guy. And in Agile, this is a famous 3 Amigos principle. I want to add a 4th Amigo, the monitoring Amigo. So for the reasons I have explained. So all those people need to be involved when you do performance testing. And okay, not every team has a performance tester of the performance capabilities. How can you tackle that? I see 3 kind of models. First one is the external one, the so-called Center of Excellence. Some years ago, I worked in such a team, and what we did, we defined a service to the project performance testing. They came to us, and we did 3 runs, one in the beginning of the project, in the middle, and at the end. We did performance testing for agile and non-agile projects. The problem was that our planning was, because we made a planning, but that was not always related or aligned to the planning of a sprint. So often we noticed that it was not enough, 3 runs. So the model where a big believer, is what I call the transversal squad. So create a squad which is fully embraced in your agile, which means is applying the agile ceremonies and so on, has the agile roles, and they are responsible for doing performance testing. In the next slide I will go more in detail. And of course, finally, but that's the ideal world, you have your Superman or Superwoman in your team. And I see it more as a capability. It doesn't have to be always the same person. If your developer can do performance test or prepare the performance test, it's okay. Or maybe the technical tester. So transversal squad, how does it look like? They have an own backlog, and they do backlog refinement, and they collect the requests from the different teams. Of course, they do a sprint planning, and maybe what is a little bit different than another squad is that the composition is flexible. Flexible in that way that you have fixed members, the Scrum Master and performance engineer. But the other people, they join the sprint based on the scope of the sprint planning. And in a Scrum of Scrum meeting, the Scrum Master of this squad can say, okay, now in the upcoming sprint, we will do performance testing for project A. So we ask you, project A, allocate some time to your members from who we need your support to support the next sprint. And so you continue. But for the other things, you apply the same principle. Daily stand-up, sprint review, retrospective. You can define continuous improvement activities. And a benefit of having this transversal squad is that the knowledge they do for a lot of projects, performance testing, and they can learn from best practices. So they have a central management of actions, best practices, and so on. And finally, when you are big enough, you can start by really training other teams, other squads, and having the performance testing capability in the squad. Okay, so like I said, 3 reasons why performance testing is not fully embraced in agile testing. But remember the slide with the definition of the Gartner report. We are not talking about performance testing. It's much broader. And that's something that is still raising in the minds of management, but slowly, because often they think if we do a performance test, then we've done and we did our work. No, there is a lot more involved than just doing a performance test. And is this now the final end state? Can you happy with this state? No. And why not? Because I miss still a very important information. I miss information about my infrastructure. Let's take the assumption you are all application owners, and when you go back on Monday morning, you get a call from the server team, and they say, we have a huge problem. One server is down because the cooler is broken, and another server, the blade is stuck, and so we can't restart the server. Which server do we need to tackle as first to solve the issue? Yeah, maybe you can guess. But as long as you don't have the information which applications are using which server, I cannot make any good decision. And that's the final, or should be the final end goal, to combine the information from application side with your infrastructure side. And if you have this information together, then you can put priorities on performance testing and on monitoring. And I know I have shaped a little bit the ideal world, but even, at least if you just apply one of the ideas, then you are already a step further. And you are a step away from the Titanic scenario. Thank you, that was the end of my talk, so my contact details are on the slide. Are there questions?
Exactly.
We are testing, for example, web services. So system that are, so the project where I'm talking about.
Is it only like, do you only measure the time?
No, it's one of the main measurements is average response time. But of course, we're monitoring also CPU. And the monitoring people, they want to know, okay, because they, with their virtual infrastructure. They want to know in which time frames do we have to spin up additional machines, so to scale flexible the machines you need to handle all the load. So it's about CPU, memory, all that stuff. So there are a lot of counters you take into account.
Yeah,
when
it's not like radical test, like for example, if a test fail, a test cannot fail. You just have some measurements.
Yeah, measurements, and it's based if you have an SLA, and the slide with response times, and that's important that you upfront with the business, that you discuss what is the acceptable response time, and even more, define in performance testing you have the so-called percentiles, so in the 90% percentile. So can we live in 90% of the cases, for example, can we live with a response time max 5 seconds for this kind of transactions? And this information you have to define upfront. And then you do your test against those SLA. Yes. In most customers, they don't have this information available. What we do then we do a first run. We do it multiple times during the day and on several days just to avoid that it was a kind of a lucky shot. And when you see that there is a trend, then you say, okay, this is the baseline. Yes. And every next performance test is compared against the baseline.
Okay, thank you.
Can you please explain the idea about having a technical backlog in details? Because it seems to me if we have a business backlog and a technical backlog, we never have enough capacity to take item from technical backlog to our iteration.
Yeah. So your technical backlog is so containing all the non-functional requirements, and based on the application, you define together with the developers which non-technical requirement will be handled in a sprint. So if, for example, you know that in a sprint a certain function will be delivered, then by adding the non-functional requirement saying this function needs to respond within 2 seconds, you do performance test and you measure that this function is responding within the...
So it may be not a backlog, it may be something like wiki, am I right?
Yeah, the format in which you can, at least you need to make them explicit. You need to list them somewhere so that you don't forget to take them into account when you plan sprints, when you plan your work. Because often the non-functions are not well documented, and yeah, they are a little bit...
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wim, for the topic. What do you think, when is the best time to automate performance tests during release?
Yeah. With automating, I guess you mean when do I put them in a CI/CD pipeline?
Something that I can put to CI, yes.
Yeah. First of all, just ensure that you have some performance tests. And don't put too many focus on, we need to do it already fully integrated, because then you will mix up things together. So currently, what we are doing, so that project has a CI/CD pipeline, but we just do our performance testing in a more manual way. And we told them, hey guys, as long as we see that there are performance issues, just try to solve the performance issues. And because at this moment, it has no sense to automate them and to launch them overnight, because the performance is so bad that, yeah, even if we automate them overnight, the next morning we will see it's the same result. So we told the developers, let's focus on solving the issues, and when we have the feeling it becomes more stable, then we will integrate it with the Jenkins, and in Jenkins it's just by adding a job which is calling the performance scripts and then integrating the results.
So it's something like backlog, yes? Backlog of already implemented features. Automation backlog of already implemented features to put it to Jenkins.
Well, with the automation, I just mean integrate it as a step in your CI/CD pipeline.
Okay, and what tools are you using?
For doing performance testing?
Automation.
For automation, it's Jenkins, so it's just automation of the pipeline. It's not functional automation tools. Which performance testing tools we are using? Currently, we are using Neoload. That's from the vendor Neotis. That's a commercial one which comes with a free bunch of 50 users and covering not all technologies. Then you have the Micro Focus, the load runner, which is covering most of technologies, but which is less intuitive for non-technical people to create a performance test. You have JMeter, which is an open source tool. So that are the most common tools that are used for doing, for creating your performance test scripts.
Thank you. Can it be integrated with UI test or current test suite?
Yes, it can, and that's just by putting it in your CI/CD pipeline. And even in...
Or will it be standalone?
No, so, and that's an improvement of your CI/CD pipeline. So once you can integrate your automated UI testing, that after your automated UI testing, you do performance test. So, and there are performance test tools that even through an API from which you can launch a functional UI test.
Okay, thank you. I'll take one last question. Yep.
So can we consider like the whole set of UI tests as a performance test? Because at the end we have like the time it took like for the whole test to run, compare it by the different builds, for example.
It's you can use UI testing if you are interested in real end-user response times. And like I said, performance test tools can integrate such a UI test. But in the other kind of performance testing, you do more performance test machine to machine. Just and you make abstraction of the processing which typically happen at the end user time. So most performance tests are machine to machine, so to see, okay, how is the web server, the application server is. But you should make scenarios where both are combined.
All right, thank you. And you can also give away 2 tokens. Whomever deserves it.
Well, I think there were 2 ladies who were asking a question. So when my parents, they teach me, be polite, ladies first, so...
That's unfair for guys.
Thank you anyway, and if you have questions, I'm still here, so...